bringing you conservative conversations, commentary and content. And now you can access these important discussions in the format that you prefer. Watch, read, listen. You can watch our content on our website, familyfirst.nz. Simply click on the Watch tab and you'll see all our various programs that you can view. You can also watch these across our social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, TikTok, Threads and Blue Sky. Everywhere. If you'd prefer to listen while you go about your daily activities or are travelling in a vehicle, then click on the Listen tab and the latest content is there for you to listen to. You can also find us on Spotify under Family First NZ. And if you prefer to read our commentary, then click on the Read tab. We're increasing the frequency of our written commentary, focusing on the latest research and analysing the current news events which are relevant to families and society. We provide the insight and context which you won't get from the mainstream media. We're also now adding the full scripts of Family Matters and McBlog under the video link in our website, and also written summaries on our live stream shows so that you can read and digest the material at your own pace. Consume our conservative conversations in the way that best suits you. Watch, read, listen. Go to familyfirst.nz and join the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning for this. I think it's the 117th episode of Solid Ground. Who would have ever thought? Who would have ever thought? Welcome to the show. Lovely to have you here today. Oh, I was going to press one more button, otherwise I'll make a mistake. Look, lovely to have you all along. There's no shortage, as always, of topics, but we'll be talking not about COVID today, the COVID report that has come out, not just what was in it, but also what the media has not told you. The mainstream media, by and large, not only ignored the topic, but I would argue, as I tried last, I think it must be on Tuesday, how they were basically trying to set the scene. So we'll talk a bit about that, and a few other stories to start. But as we do, a reminder to everyone, if you want to comment live, and I see them coming in already, if you want to comment live, please jump onto Family First Facebook page or onto its YouTube channel. Those are the ones that feed directly to me. Otherwise, I will read your comments later. If you're on my LinkedIn, you're on Substack or Instagram, welcome. It is lovely to have you. But I can't see those until after the show. So again, if you've got comments because we talked through this morning, let me know. Always love to know what you're thinking. Or if there's something else happening in New Zealand or around the world you want some comment on, let me know and I will do my best. And live comments, as you know, I love them. I won't spend too long here because we have such a big morning. But good morning. And I'm losing my voice for some reason. So apologies in advance. But good morning to Lynette. We've got Jackie there. Good morning, Mike. Always lovely to have you along. As you too, Edmund. Lovely. Good morning. Rosie there and Talpo. I have to say, I'm still in Auckland, of course. But I am struck. We are in autumn. It's. I remember coming up to the treehouse where I now have my studio. And it was nice and sunny in the morning, but it's not anymore, is it? Catherine's asking who was on the RCR webinar last night. It was very good, wasn't it? Marie and the team are brilliant. And Robin's saying, thank you for the interview I did with, see if I can find the button, there we go, with Tanya. That was on RCR yesterday. God morning from Dean, lovely to have you along. And David, lovely, good morning. Warrington in England. What? Well, that is fantastic, David. Welcome to you. Lovely to have you along. You'll have to tell me in the comments exactly where Warrington is. I mean, I could always jump onto Google, but I'm in the middle of a show. But I actually don't think I've visited. Do let me know. I would love to. I'd love so. But yeah, this is a interview I did on RCR, so Reality Check Radio, yesterday with Tanya Unkovic. So she was one of the MPs who was strongly calling for that Royal Commission into COVID. To be fair, as we discussed, and jump onto the interview, I won't repeat it all here. She, like I, was disappointed where a lot of it went. It was a very narrative report, but we'll come to that. But if you want to know, and that was the one that people were commenting on, I've lost my show. There it is. There's the button. I'm losing it this morning. Not only am I losing my voice, but I clearly just don't have it fully together on Thursday. So look, a couple of items before I move on to the Royal Commission report here. But I thought there was a couple of things of note. One is this, because it's exciting new news. There's a sentence for you. It's exciting new news. Actually, I will finish that. So this is exciting news of a new show from Family First. As you can see, it's a younger generation. It's not the grey-haired people like myself. It's a younger generation hosting something called Counterculture, and it premieres tonight. So yes, tonight, Thursday night, 8 o'clock. So after you've watched this, after you've watched Political Playback at 5, stay tuned for it. 8 o'clock tonight, Counterculture is premiering, the first ever show. So it's young people talking about faith, about Christianity, about culture, about politics. And so I think it's going to be fantastic because it's going to be a younger group of people. In fact, I'm going to do this so you can see the full experience. So you can see we've got Ethan, Samuel, Arian, and Jake. There are other people part of the show, but there's only going to be 4 a week. A little bit like Straight Talk, but maybe cooler because they're younger. And so their perspectives are going to be great as they talk about the issues of the day, the political issues, the faith issues, and so on. So very exciting. And David tells me that Warrington is in northwest England in Cheshire, I should say. Sorry, excuse my horrendous accent and voice this morning between Manchester and Liverpool. How fantastic. Yeah, I've been up to Birmingham, which I know is not quite there. That's about as far north as I've got into the UK, I'm sad. So I've really got to go back. And Simply Green saying that's interesting, the new show with all the culture wars. Yeah, well, it is actually, and that's one of the one of the reasons we've got the young ones into the show. And I'm going to take some coffee because I think I'm falling to pieces this morning. There we go. I've been doing lots of podcasts actually, so I think quite literally I'm losing my voice. So that was the big news. Exciting. Also in the news, I came across this. Gwen Stefani, so you should know her as the singer. She says she's converted back to Christianity, which is in itself quite remarkable. Now, exactly what branch of Christianity? Is it more on the fringe or is it mainstream? Is she embracing the teachings of the church? I don't know. But I thought it was just a nice news story that actually a celebrity of this note has publicly said, look, she had a child at 44, which in itself is quite a miracle, but quite remarkable. But yeah, she says that actually through this, she's found her way back to faith. Her first husband, she married actually in a Catholic church. So she's clearly had a faith already. But here it is. I just thought it was nice, a nice news story. In the bizarre news stories, I came across this. I don't know if you saw it yesterday. This was off the BBC. It's one of the international channels I look at, not because it's particularly good, but it's useful. In fact, I've become quite disappointed in the BBC over the years, but it's still a useful point for information along with other sites. But Uber is rolling out, it says, a woman-only option in the US. Now, at first glance, part of me says that's actually not a bad idea. If particularly women want to choose a women-driven car, that's fine. But I thought I'd do a little bit of digging because, as you know, we're immersed, guys, in the culture wars, and we're always being told about the trans issue. Well, long and short, to be a woman driver in Uber, all you have to do is identify as a woman. Let that sink in for a moment. All you have to do is check a box and say you are a woman. So while this is a big PR stunt, and clearly it's getting coverage in the likes of the BBC, there is no guarantee actually that a woman will be picking you up, because men who think they're women can just simply tick the box, all in the name of Uber's inclusion policies. So it's a bit of a distraction, really. There's going to be some lawsuits, it sounds like, as well, because some are arguing this is discrimination, which of course it is. I'm actually not a purist in this space. I actually don't mind the fact that, if you want a woman driver, you can. It's the same as in the past. I don't mind that there are men's only clubs, or like Sal Grover, who set up her woman only app. I don't think in those spaces it's much of an issue. But I just thought this was quite funny. That yes, a big trumpeting of a woman's only choice in Uber, but any person, any driver, can choose to identify as a woman, whether they are or whether they're a man. So I just thought that was funny in a strange way. Yes, and who's Dean telling me girl power? Yes, it will be, except to say their inclusion policy is such that you're going to have men picking you up as well, or men who think they're women. So anyway, I just thought that was funny. But anyway, I thought I'd turn a bit of attention to this. I know Bob has done a lot yesterday. Going to take another cut. I quite literally am losing my voice, which is probably a blessing for the nation, but not so good for doing live shows. But I'll take another swig of coffee. That'll help. There we go. You can hopefully you're enjoying a coffee with me. So look, on Tuesday at about 1 o'clock, the Phase 2 report of the Royal Commission into COVID was released. And there's sort of two themes I want to pick up here, as I mentioned at the start. One is I'll give a quick commentary on the report and what I think ultimately it's failed to address. And I wouldn't mind just spending a short amount of time talking about the media's response, because I think it's been very disappointing. And as Tanya and I talked about yesterday, a lot of pre-framing. So in the last couple of weeks, the media's been actually busy running, I would call them puff pieces around COVID. But first to the report, as I said, it's Phase 2. Because the original Royal Commission that the Labour government instigated was exceptionally narrow, both in its scope, in other words, what questions it could deal with, but also its time. It only went up to 2021, I think. Didn't cover the entire length of the experience, or the horrific experience that most of us went through. So this is Phase 2. It's much, much broader. Looks at vaccinations, looks at the mandates, which in and of itself sounds good, but doesn't look at the efficacy of the vaccines. In other words, did they work? It doesn't look at adverse reactions and harm caused by the vaccine. As you'll know, a lot of people claim or talk about these harms. I've seen them firsthand, people I do trust and know who are no longer as well as they were. Sadly, the Royal Commission doesn't look into those, and I see some different comments coming through here, including from Simply Green, saying it's a whitewash. I think sadly it is. It's a report that reads like a narrative. It doesn't, for me, critique particularly deeply. I was searching yesterday around churches, for example. I know Bob was as well. We were curious to what extent, excuse me, the Royal Commission looked at the impact on faith communities, on churches, seeing the state overrode the rights of the churches and shut them down effectively. You remember we weren't allowed to go to church together and sing because it was one of the most dangerous things one could do. And you've heard me mock it before because the government opened restaurants and brothels but kept churches closed. I mean, how ridiculous can you be? But as I was searching, the word church is mentioned a few times, mostly in the context of Christchurch, as in the city. But when it is mentioned, and this is only an example, it's just a passing narrative comment. Probably the closest it gets in the report is to say, look, clearly social cohesion broke down during the COVID days. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because the government forced our hand, breached our rights, and told us that we could only have one opinion. You remember the single source of truth. I don't have that video, I really should have it here. But when Jacinda was telling us all she was the single source of truth, nothing in my mind started the breakdown of social cohesion more than that, because it really started to put the government against everyone and what we were seeing and experiencing. The second thing out of the report is it talks about the vaccinations and says basically, the mandating of them was too much. Now, I don't have the exact sentence in front of me, but the way that the report talks about it is in very Royal Commission talk, very political talk. It's just saying, oh, look, it should still be an option in the toolbox. It mandates, that is. But, we should be very careful about using them. Personally, I think that's a fairly strong statement that we shouldn't be doing mandates again. They were exceptionally harmful, and something I talked to quite a bit in the Parliament at the time. I just think it was a huge overreach, and you guys have heard me say it before. If you're going to start breaching human rights, there has to be a really good reason, and COVID wasn't. We lost our freedom around our medical choices. We lost our freedom of speech to a degree, because if you had an alternative opinion, basically you didn't get platformed or you got abused. So they all those got compromised. And human rights exist, as you've probably heard me say before, for the bad times. Our human rights are not there per se when everything is tickety-boo. Human rights exist for the bad times. And the government threw them out, I'm sad to say, during COVID, which was most unfortunate. So, as I say, the mandates are far too excessive. The report says, look, there was no nuance, there was no subtlety, there was no ability to seemingly change. It was just one big monolithic mandate on pretty much everyone. And you've probably heard me say before, I remember people trying to help them get exemptions from the Director General of Health, so Ashley Bloomfield. Nothing. Now look, I'm not a doctor, but I know enough to know that, when someone has a good cause for an exemption, it wasn't granted. And I think that's probably one of my overall takeaways, guys, is the government just took one approach, a single approach to just about everything, and showed no flexibility, no desire to manoeuvre or to change. So a blanket mandate on everyone. Everyone has to be vaccinated. Lockdowns just going on and on. That they were the source of truth. It was always singular. And I think they got addicted to power, to be honest. Actually, I don't have to be honest. I think it's as clear as day. They got addicted to power and setting rules. And rather than becoming more flexible, rather than allowing exceptions, they didn't. And, the terrible thing here, and then I'll get to some comments because I can see them flying through, is they didn't report all the information that they had. And there's two areas. One is, you remember rat tests? You remember those, you had to swiggle in your nose and put it on a little plastic cassette? They held off allowing those into the country, even though they knew they were effective and they could actually source them. In fact, I think you could go as far to say that they were lying to us when they were talking about all these difficulties. Actually, they should have been brought into the country much, much earlier. And we can see in this Phase 2 report, that actually the ministry says, look, they're fine, they've been used in the likes of Australia, we should have them. But the rat tests, one would have stopped a whole lot of issues around the mandates. People could turn up to work having done the test rather than having to get the vaccination jab, which they did not want to get. But the government refused for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. It was a real option that would have made a difference, would have actually taken pressure off the testing system, but the government would not and chose not to do so. The second is, the Ministry of Health. This is around people under 18 years of old. So you might recall the government forced between 12 and 17-year-olds, so children or teenagers, to get the vaccination jab. Well, the Ministry of Health, in advice to ministers, so to Chris Hipkins and Asher Verrill and the others, said, look, one is okay, but two is a risk. There's a heightened risk actually of heart issues, particularly what they call myocarditis, and particularly for men. Well, they ignored that advice. That's the long and the short of it. I think that's horrifying. It's a dereliction of duty and something they're going to have to live with, because actually they've put a lot of young people at risk. The Ministry of Health was clear. One jab, okay. Two, no, don't do it. but the government chose to again. It had one approach, and it could not show any flexibility, which is just, I think, terrible. So anyway, I might just take some comments because I can see loads coming through. I probably won't get to all of them. They were severe breaches. And Catherine's right. She's saying, because I said the report said, I think, don't use them. But it's not saying forbid them. Catherine's right. It said it can use them again. They say to keep them in the toolbox. But my reading of the wording is actually they're sending quite a signal. They didn't think it was the right way forward. But Catherine is right. They could use them again. And Simply Green's commenting on that. Sorry, as I'm reading everything coming through. Yeah, I think mandates have been incredibly damaging. And as I'm saying, there were so many other options that could have been deployed, but they couldn't cope with it. Optiman's saying that Singapore's actually written them into the law. This is mandates again. I think actually it's one of the worrying recommendations, if I've read the report correctly, is not just that, but the report basically says, look, the government exceeded its legal mandate. Bad pun there, but it exceeded its legal mandate in many ways. And you'll know that since the lockdowns and so forth, a lot of court cases have been brought against the government, and people have won. They've won those against the government. But the Royal Commission says, well, look, basically the government needs to pass laws to make what it does next time legal. Or maybe in some rare aspects, but actually the government should just not be infringing our rights. That would be helpful. In other words, don't start writing in draconian new laws to give the government even more power. It's just quite nuts. Sam, I think, has got a good point. It was imprisoning people. I think it was ridiculous and noted at the time from opposition. Locking people up, stopping people's freedom of association, freedom of movement is wrong. And a lot of other countries just didn't do this. It's just absolutely terrible. Simply Green again around, probably can't, actually maybe you can read the whole thing. Yeah, people should have got exemptions if they had autoimmune, and they didn't. I know people with heart issues were asking for exemption. There's specialists writing letters. I mean, this is not just someone believing it. There's specialists are saying, look, don't do this. Sue is noting that that people had thought there would be an inquiry around vax injuries and impacts. There was not, as Sue has pointed out, which is really unfortunate. And Rosie's backing up what others are saying too. Exemption should have been granted, but the fact is they didn't want to give them, and that's pretty my underlying point here. They've just had one way to do things. So anyway, Robin's saying it's a huge overreach, which is true. Others are saying Edmund's noting just how weak those making the decisions were. Boy, it's firing up now. I'll note there. And Dean's noting that we signed up to WHO. I think, yes, that's the World Health Organization. I think that's a big part of why New Zealand did a lot of what other countries did, is all following in lockstep. And personally, I want our country to make its own decisions. Pot of Gold's knowing that the vaccine made their heart thump like that never before in their life and not doing it again. Well, I think Pot of Gold, that's where most are now. I think I was saying, I'll segue onto this before we finish up for the day, that the media been banging on. I think I talked about this on the Tuesday show, all about the 9th wave of COVID and so on and so forth. But basically no one's getting boosted anymore. People are choosing not to, because despite the likes of mainstream media making a big noise, most people are well over it now. And I'm not going to do a poll here, but I'd say most of us haven't bothered going and get the booster since basically we were forced to. And you know what? We're all living our best lives by and large, struggling with the cost of living and all of that, but things are good, except my voice. And again, I apologise this morning. And I see Optimum saying National supports the WHO pandemic treaty. Yeah, I'm not, I'll put that up. Where is it? Yeah, I'm not supporting, well, I'm not in Parliament anymore, but I'm not supportive of that. I just don't think we need, in cases like this, a response where we are led by the globe. God, I'm not articulating that very well, am I? I think we can cooperate with other nations. I think we can learn from one another, but we don't have to be following what a global entity tells us to do. I'm a great believer in our own sovereignty in our own country, and New Zealand should be able to make its decisions. So I think signing up to these pandemic treaties are not very prudent. As I said, agreements to share data and all of that, great, no problem whatsoever. But New Zealand should make its responses. So yeah, no, I'm not supportive of that decision. I think it's the wrong one. And I said some of the recommendations coming out are not positive, as I say, trying to, instead of saying to the government, you overreached your powers, don't do it again, the Royal Commission says just pass new laws to allow you to have those powers. So nuts to me. Hey, look, before I wrap up, because as always, I talk too much and time is flying by, but I just thought the media, mainstream media, completely tone deaf. Not all in every media, so obviously we're talking about it here in Family First, because as you know, Family First was one of the groups speaking very, very loudly into the space around COVID, that is, for the rights of churches and individuals to not actually use the mandates in a way that divide people. In fact, I think it was like 80,000+ people signed a petition that Bob started around being able to use the likes of these rapid antigen tests or RAT tests. Again, all ignored. So we're talking about RCRs, talking about it, platform, which is good to see. But this is one example from mainstream media. Saying, oh, we've all moved on. Well, no, we haven't. You know what? I think that the harms in society, the breakdown of social cohesion, the lack of trust, hasn't moved on. And it's one of my great disappointments out of the report. And actually, I have a lot of time for Luke Malpass, but I just think he's missed the mark here. And I'm actually not targeting him as an individual. I think this is just an example. And there's another one to follow. A lot of New Zealanders haven't moved on. I think the ones who want to move on, sorry, I'm just looking at the comments, and I see one coming from Tanya here. I'll get to that in a moment, Tanya. Thank you. Actually, there's piles coming through, which is great. I've got a lot of reading to do after this. A lot of people who want to move on from the COVID experience are those who actually, if I have to be blunt with you guys, acted like jackasses. They are the people, like in mainstream media or in the government of the time, the Labour government, who made decisions which harmed people, and they don't want to talk about it. The people who want to move on are those that broke friendships and family relationships around the vaccine. You know, those people who said, oh no, you can't play with my kids if they're not vaccinated. People who refuse to speak to loved ones because of the vaccination status. They want to move on. But my sense, as I go around the country and I talk to different people, is there's a lot of hurt, deep hurt, from what happened, from the way they were treated because of their vaccination status, because they were sceptical. Treatment, of course, down in Wellington at the Parliament. I'm very conscious of that. There's a lot of deep hurts. What we talk about is actually moral injury. So it's not physical injury for some, of course, but it's a moral injury, something that deeply hurts, a grief, if you will. And they're not moving on, and they can't move on. And it's my disappointment with this report, the report that came out from the Royal Commission, that it's not going to help people move on, in fact, because it hasn't addressed their issues. So I just thought mainstream media... comments like this, deeply inappropriate. I noticed as well that by and large they're not reporting it. Even TV1 News, it was barely mentioned. Barely mentioned. Tanya's asking me, do I think the departure of personnel may have been reflective, was not... sorry, so I can see the full comment here. So Tanya's asking, people leaving phase 2 because it was not progressing in the direction they thought. I don't know, Tanya. I don't have that much inside knowledge, or not enough, but I suspect that's a possibility, that they were frustrated by the direction it was taken. I mean, it's quite possible too that other things were cropping up in their lives, Royal Commissions. It's a big task, but I suspect that's probably a big part of it. As I say, it's a near boring narrative. It really doesn't address, I think, many of the issues that people wanted. Optimum Performance is noting that even like on the platform, Sean's pretending he didn't call people, what did he say, anti-vaxxers and idiots. What did he call people? Cookers. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people re-examining their positions. For me, when people do start apologising and saying, you know what, I actually made a mistake back then, I think we need a little bit of grace. I mean, it's understandable to be frustrated and angry, but we need a little bit of grace, because if we're nice to those people and say, well, look, thank you for saying sorry, then maybe more will, but I've just been struck, as I keep saying, with mainstream media. Either they're not reporting the issue, like this, as we've moved on. And then I thought this was a great example from the Herald. I hope you can read it. It's the top text. I think the headline's not in itself too bad, to be honest. But at the top, and again, I don't know if you can read it, it says, it was $30 million to run this Royal Commission. So it's trying to undermine the Commission on the spend of money. Oh, it's $30 million. And not actually focusing more on the outcomes of what the Commission was saying, or even critiquing what the Commission did. It's basically trying to undermine its work by saying, well, this was a lot of money, we shouldn't have spent it. Interestingly, the Herald really needs to focus more, as it does just at the bottom in the headline, just a little bit, the spending too high. The spending wasn't just too high. The Labour government spent like $60 billion, not billion, $1 billion, $60 billion during COVID. And get this, guys, half of it wasn't even on COVID-related stuff. It was just their pet project. So anyway, we could talk for hours on all of this. As Robin's noting, people who were vaccine injured and loved ones who have not been acknowledged, how do they move on? And this is the point. I had hoped, Robin, and I'll wrap up here because I'm conscious, guys, it's 8 o'clock. I had hoped that those people would have been able to pick up the report and had a sense that their voices had been heard. But they haven't. That's one of the great, great disappointments to me. Excuse my voice. They've not been heard. They still feel like they've been ignored. I think a lot of people will still feel like they're ignored. So I know the crew, as at Voices for Freedom, I think today or tomorrow, are starting to put out their report. They've been doing their own work. I mean, again, it's my hope with that people will hear their voices. It's got, is it Negan? Sorry, if people who know, I'm looking at a very small screen, so I apologise if I'm saying things wrong, but saying those of us who stood outside the beehive are laughing last. Yeah, 99% of media ran with the, yeah, well, they did. And look, I don't have time today, and I talked about it before, but how the Parliament as a whole reacted. I'm very, very conscious as an MP at the time, the decisions and the directions that were being made not to engage. I think it's one of the really sadder elements of the whole show that New Zealanders came to their Parliament, and they include myself in that, didn't come out. As I say, I've talked about the reasons why people like myself felt we couldn't. Those are reasons. You can decide if they're excuses or not, but that was in itself quite sad. And the media too, as I say, they were just reporting one direction on all of this stuff, and in some ways, that's another. Well, not even some ways. It's what's leading the harm, continuing to lead the harm. And food dogs trucking. Who knows? I love the name. Saying Jacinda's moved to Australia. Well, that's it. I mean, you can see how it all is still just messy, isn't it, guys? And I'm probably not articulating as clearly as I want today, but the report hasn't answered the questions. The report hasn't allowed people's voices to be heard. People like Jacinda did not show up to speak to the Commission. I think it's a moral failure, and then has left the country. We still have people like Chris Hipkins in power who made all of those decisions. Now trying to sidestep what occurred. We have the mainstream media playing down the report and just outright ignoring it. We're not going to have the healing that we need. Anyway, I better finish there, partly because I do apologise this morning for my voice. I said I've been talking far too much. Just a reminder, tonight... Oh, have I pressed the wrong button? I have. This is the button I want. There we go. A reminder tonight, because I'm still here hiding in the background, Counterculture, Family First, new show with 4 amazing young men. We do have women as well, by the way, but it's the 4 guys tonight talking the Christian, cultural, political aspects. I'm not going to, well, as it says, truth, culture, and everything in between. So tune in at 8 o'clock tonight. A reminder, of course, that Bob and I have political playback at 5. We will be talking more about the COVID report, and hopefully by then I've got my my voice back. Bring your comments. And that's the final thing I'll say. Oh, actually, and a reminder too, if you want to hear more, jump on to RCR. And you can also go on to Family First Facebook page. You'll see Bob and I did some breaking breaking news as well around this. So lots and lots of commentary is happening. And Catherine, oh no, it's Robin. Robin is saying, I hope you can have her. Yeah, I'm not feeling 100% today, I must admit, and I don't know exactly why. But anyway, very astute of you. Thank you. That is very kind. And Dennis, lovely to have you along. I see you commenting there. Guys, better go. I've gone well after 8 o'clock. I will go and read through all the comments then. But you guys have a wonderful day and look forward to, well, seeing some of you tonight on Political Playback. Hopefully you guys can tune in to Counterculture. Let us know what you think. Otherwise, I'll see you on Tuesday.